So I have the pleasure of introducing Professor Tariq Ramadan, who's going to give us a speech about Islamic ethics, or applied Islamic ethics specifically. I think he needs no introduction, but he is a professor of contemporary Islamic studies at Oxford University, and he teaches on the Faculty of Theology in Oxford University as well. He's a visiting professor at the Faculty of Islamic Studies in Doha, Qatar, and a senior research fellow at Doshisha University in Kyoto, Japan, and a visiting professor of philosophy at Mundapolis University in Morocco. He holds an MA in philosophy and French literature and a PhD in Arabic and Islamic studies from the University of Geneva, and he studied one-on-one with scholars at Al-Azhar University for a few years in Cairo, Egypt. Through his writings and lectures, Tariq has contributed substantially to the debate on the issues of Islam and Muslims in the West and the issues around Islamic revival in the Muslim world. He's active at both the academic and the grassroots levels, and he's lectured extensively throughout the world on theology, ethics, social justice, ecology, and intercultural, as well as interfaith dialogue. He is the president of the European think tank, European Muslim Network. It is my pleasure to introduce Professor Tariq Ramadan.
Okay, thank you for your invitation here this morning. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be with you yesterday and this morning, early this morning, just coming from London and trying my best to catch up with the jet lag and my luggage, which was lost, and usual things. Thank you for this invitation. I'm happy to be here, and especially on that topic. I have been working on that field for years now, and trying to come with, for myself, a better understanding of the tradition, the Islamic tradition, between the two main fields, which is the first one that I studied, because as a Muslim living in the contemporary world, my first perception when I was studying with the scholars in Egypt and studying facing the challenges of our contemporary world was really the field of fiqh was essential. Fiqh as law and Islamic law and jurisprudence. How do we have to deal with the new challenges to find new rules, or at least adapted rules for our time? And after 15 years working on that field and coming with responses, or at least vision for the Muslim majority countries as well as for the Western Muslims, my sense was that I was reaching a limit. That my understanding of this perception that fiqh was the only answer, as I'm still thinking that this is the field that we have to deal with, but reaching a limit and asking myself, am I doing the right thing by trying to find answers for the challenges in our contemporary world, or is it exactly what I want to reform our understanding? Because as I'm always repeating, there is no way for me to reform Islam, but there is a way and a necessity to reform the Muslim minds, which is completely different, which in fact is what the scholars were saying when they were dealing with the hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him, when he was saying, Allahu yab'athu li hadhihi al-umma ala ra'si kulli mi'atin sana man yujaddidu laha dinaha. The perception is that God is going to send to this community every century someone or a group of people who are going to renew for this community its religion. The renewal was the understanding, not the text. The texts are staying, are remaining the text, but the way we are dealing with the text. So, in fact, my main question at one point after 15 years was, is it right to be focusing on law and jurisprudence and fiqh, and not to come, in fact, to the source of all this, usul al-fiqh, the fundamentals. The sources, not to deny the importance of fiqh, but to contextualize and to prioritize the whole understanding, to come back to a more comprehensive approach of the different Islamic fields and sciences. And This is where I came to Usul al-Fiqh, and the book Radical Reform, Islamic Ethics and Liberation is a book on Usul al-Fiqh, coming back to the tradition because I take it seriously, I think it's important, but also from the tradition to say, okay, what can we get from the tradition to face the contemporary questions? Don't we have to reassess the framework, the priorities, and the objectives? So this is what, from this Usul al-Fiqh, what I call the field of Islamic applied Islamic ethics, and I will explain that. Having said that now, as an introduction to the discussion, I also want to add 3 points. The first is, when it comes to Islamic ethics, we need to get a better understanding of the terminology. We have a deep problem of terminology and definition, that we are using terms and sometimes not clear. It's quite clear that ethics in the Greek language and the way we are using it in English, it's not exactly al-akhlaqiyat in Arabic. Because al-akhlaqiyat in Arabic is something which has to do with another field, which has to do with behavior, with the way we deal with al-masalih, the public interest. It's not exactly ethics. So we need to get with al-akhlaq something which has to do with al-maqasid, which is the objectives, and al-ahkam, which is the rules. All together are giving us a sense of what ethics could be. So I think that we have to be very, very precise and very, very demanding on the terminology that we are using. So for me, to make it simple for today, but we can open the discussion. I don't have time to go to a deep discussion, in-depth discussion on terminology, but as a field, there is something that we have to do. I think that we have to deal with 3 dimensions. The first, when it comes to applied ethics, and this is done by all the traditions, Buddhist tradition, Hindu tradition, Jewish tradition, Christian tradition, or atheist tradition, is when you speak about ethics, the point is the source. Where do you get that from? It's okay? I don't know if you are talking to me. So the source, where do you get that from? And it's a very important question in the Islamic tradition. Is it only coming from the scriptural sources, the Quran or Sunnah, the prophetic traditions, or from somewhere else? And very often in the field of fuqaha and al-usuliyun, it's very quick that we are focusing on texts. And this is, for me, something which is to be questioned. Is it true that from the very beginning, the fuqaha and al-usuliyin, even the Shafi'i, who was the first in the Sunni tradition, but not the first in the Shia tradition, were dealing with only the scriptural sources. So straight away, when you come to the tradition, you understand that the sources are not only the scriptural sources. That from the very beginning, Ja'far al-Sadiq, for example, in the Shia tradition, who was the teachers of many Sunni scholars, and the Sunni scholars like the Shafi'i, were always integrating in the source the environment and the state of affairs, the context, what we call the context. So this double intelligence of the text and the context is part of all the sources. Meaning by this that only you have to rely on a naql, which are the text, but also on al-aql, which is the way you understand the context. So this is something that we have to take into account. And if you go to all the tradition, you will find that even with Malik, who was the first one in the chronology to speak about al-masalih al-mursala, masalih al-mursala means in the tradition is that there are silences in the text, and then this is left to the people to find their way in the light of the text. But and when we have, even if for some of the scholars is not the highest level of authenticity, the hadith of Muaz ibn Jabal, when he was sent to Yemen, and he was saying, on what are you going to rely? On the Quran, and then on the Sunnah al-Rasul, the prophetic tradition, and then ashtahidu bi ra'yi. So I'm going to come back to my mind. And I'm going to exert myself to find a solution. Meaning by this that sometimes the text is silent and you have to use your mind. But the mind with what? with the new context. Meaning what? That in Yemen, the context will ask you questions. And as the context is part of the source, we need to find a way. So there is something here which is a discussion about the sources, and it's important. Because when you define the sources, you are going to define the authority. Where does it come from means, if it's come only from the text, the people of the text will get the authority. But if it comes also from the universe, the people who have the knowledge of the universe will have authority. Tell me the sources, I will let you know, and I will understand for you who are the people of. Thank you. Thank you so much. The second thing, which of course, when it comes to ethics, is a rule, it's al-ahkam. That it's quite clear that in the text, but not only in the text, in the universe, there are limits. The natural order is putting limits on us. We know that we are going to die, so our freedom from the very beginning is not absolute. This is what Ibn Tufayl was saying from the very beginning, that we are facing limits, and the natural limits are having an impact on you. But the Quran is also telling you this is halal and this is haram, and the texts are telling you إِنَّمَا الْحَرَارُ مُبَيِّنٌ وَإِنَّمَا الْحَلَالُ بَيِّنٌ, the other way around, إِنَّمَا الْحَلَالُ بَيِّنٌ وَإِنَّمَا الْحَرَامُ بَيِّنٌ, meaning by this that there are things that are licit and illicit, lawful and unlawful. So you have to come with ahkam, and ahkam are telling you that this is the way, but these are the limits. And we have to respect this. This is part of the Islamic ethics. But not only this, you should know that if there are limits and ahkam, and if there are sources, the sources are telling you about the limits in order to achieve a specific goal. So there are objectives. And it's important, why? Because this is the question that sometimes we have. We are so obsessed with the norms that we forget that the norms are here for something specific. Which, by the way, it's not new. When we speak about al-maqasid, for example, the objectives of Islamic law and jurisprudence, for example, maqasid al-sharia, as we call it. This is something which is not new. At a specific level, it's something which is known by the scholars. When they look at the hukm, which is a rule, they try to understand the objective of the rule. They will go to what? Al-illah. What was the intention of the Sharia, which is God, when he put this specific rule? So, al-illah, meaning the intention, is telling you about the objective. If you get the intention of God on a specific ruling, you will get the objective. When you come to the verse of the Quran, وَأَقِمِ الصَّلَاةَ لِذِكْرِ, it's a very simple verse. It says, perform the prayer in order to remember me. We have al-illah, the intention is that behind your prayer, the objective is to remember God. So it's not only to pray for the sake of praying, there is an intention, there is an objective. It's to purify your heart in order to remember God. So all our rules are like this. Applied ethics means that we need to get first the sources, second the rules, and then the objectives. And sometimes to assess the rules in the light of the objectives. It might be that a literal implementation of the rules is betraying the very objective. So you have to read them in the light of the objective. In a state of famine, for example, in anything which has to do with the penal code, which was with Umar ibn al-Khattab, removed from a very specific implementation. Why? Because in the state of famine, the thieves are not exactly thieves, and yet you have to understand that they are facing very difficult conditions. In the name of justice, which is the objective, you cannot implement literally the penal code because it's going to be unjust. A literal reading on some rules or implementation of some rules, forgetting the objectives, is going to betray the very essence of the rules, which is complexifying the whole process. We know this, but it's very important when it comes to Islamic applied ethics. Very important, the three dimensions. Now, as I said, we are very often now, and this is why I see it, I can feel this, that for the last century we have lots of people who came with the idea the solutions for the Muslims is al-maqasid, is talk about the objectives. And some of the scholars, the fuqaha, were saying, oh, be careful. I see where we go. That in the name of the objectives, you don't want the rules. So you are going to remove the rules in order to get the objectives. So the objectives are so wide, so beautiful, that we are going to lose the rules. And they are right. They are right that some are using the objectives not to be serious about the rules. The only thing which is, this is the way I understand al-wasat, which is ummatan wasata, is the middle path, is don't forget the rules without the objectives and don't use the objectives to forget the rules. Which is exactly the way we have to do with between al-aql and naql. Don't forget your minds and your intellect when you read the text, but don't forget the text because you are relying on your mind and your intellect. You have to come with two. This is faithfulness. Faithfulness is to know the limits and to understand how are these dimensions playing together. Now, so anything which has to do with al-illa, to try to understand the very intention of the God when he was revealing the text, or the prophetic tradition, this is part of a process where you are trying to understand the essence of the rules in the light of the intention and the objectives, and this is an intellectual construction. Of course, it's an intellectual construction. This is why the scholars did not agree. From the very beginning, they accepted that they don't agree on the intention. I don't get it the same way as you get it, and this is an accepted diversity. Why? Because there is a room for interpretation between the scholars. On the illah is not always clear, and because it's not always clear, there is a room for interpretation. So this is something which is an accepted diversity. So when we speak about applied ethics, there is something which is important. We should accept something which has to do with an accepted diversity in the Islamic tradition. It doesn't mean that we have Islams, but we have one Islam, many interpretations, and many ways of dealing with. And this is why in all what we have been discussing yesterday, for example, in science, in medical sciences, of course the scholars are not going to agree on all the things. In euthanasia, for example, we have not less than, I think, 14 different opinions by the Muslim scholars on euthanasia. We don't agree on first, the meaning of euthanasia, what the medical doctors are saying, and what the people are saying about the text. So we have a diversity of opinions here, and this is why we have to translate a fatwa as a legal opinion. It's an opinion. An opinion means that you have other opinions, as long as they are serious, relying on the text, and sincere. No one can say it's outside the realm of Islam. Now, if we go to the situation of today, and this is why I started to say, okay, I was dealing with fiqh and reaching limits. The true question is this one. Are we now, in the Islamic tradition, when we speak about the sources, which is usul al-fiqh, for example, what do we say about usul al-fiqh, the fundamentals of Islamic law and jurisprudence, about the fiqh, the rules, about the objective, al-maqasid, the three dimensions that I'm talking about now, are we equipped to face the contemporary questions that we have with the complexity of our knowledge today? This is the question which for me was important. And when it comes to what we have now, you listen to the Islamic discourse, and the Islamic discourse is repeating and repeating again and again. In Islam, we have a comprehensive approach. It's, Islam is dealing with everything. First, we don't know how. And when you start searching and trying to get a sense of how it is working now, that's not really true now that there is a comprehensive Islamic approach to all these sciences. Sciences are in medical sciences, in economy, in human sciences, in experimental sciences, biology and physics. We have, this knowledge there. And what is done by some of the Muslim scholars today is to try to answer some of the critical questions of the time. But these are two universes that sometimes are talking to each other, but not in a way which is a comprehensive way. There is today a segregation between sciences in Islam. And by the way, when you speak about, and this is what I have been doing when I went to Lahore a few years ago in Islamic university there, I had a very interesting discussion with professors there. And we were talking about Islamic sciences and the Islamic paradigm. And I had one simple question, and I want you to think about it. What is Islamic in what you call Islamic sciences? And what is not Islamic in what you call secular sciences? And if you get an answer to this which is clear, you can start a discussion. I'm not sure that we have a clear understanding of what is Islamic in Islamic sciences. Is it the object? Is it the objectives? Or are they the objective? What is Islamic in what we call It's exactly the same with very simple thing. When you speak about Islamic schools, for example. Are these schools based on Islamic principles or schools for Muslims? It's not clear as well. Okay. I think you get my point. So, my main task when I came to this understanding that I was reaching limits was to say, look, we need a kind of reconciliation between the universes, between sciences. Not to be scared of sciences and not to be on the defensive. The worst that we can get is an ethics which is on the defensive. That we are so scared of sciences and knowledge that, okay, let us find a way to protect ourselves. Ethics is not only about protection. It is about protection, but it's about vision, orientation, objectives. What do we want to achieve? Which, in my understanding, is the very essence of what is the prophetic invocation and supplication, saying, Allahumma nas'aluka ilman nafi'a. We ask you useful knowledge. Useful knowledge is not to succeed here in this life, but in the hereafter. But how? How are you going to succeed is by having an ethics, not to forget the values, not to forget dignity and justice and freedom and well-being. Because I really think that there is something which is in the prophetic tradition, spirituality has to do with al-litmi'nan, which is the well-being, which is the blossoming and to be at peace with your own self. But you need to get into the picture, you need to get science into the picture as well. So, having said that, let me just highlight three main fields, and this will be the way for me to just tackle the topic. Look, let me be clear on that, because once again, sometimes I'm talking about this, and I should make it, I must make it clear that there is an understanding of Islam in what I'm trying to say now. I'm just coming with what I think Islam is. It's not, you know, there is something which when we talk about Islamic ethics, when we talk about Christian ethics or Jewish ethics, behind this there is a very understanding of what you think your religion is. And for me, there is something which is very important. The only way I understand the fact that I am a Muslim and that I am referring to a tradition is one thing which is important. I think that my mission as a human being is to reform the world for the better. Myself and the world. So I have to reform myself and I have to reform the world. I'm not here to look at the world and to protect myself to say, okay, let it be a catastrophe, as long as I'm protected, that's fine. Which could be a possibility. When I speak with some literalists and they say, look at the world today, we don't want to be involved in this, let us be protected in our isolated world. I don't have this perception and vision of Islam. For me, the very understanding here is how are you going to transform yourself? And this is why the first, after Allah and Ar-Rahman, Allah, which is the Arabic name for God, and Ar-Rahman, which is the compassionate, the most merciful, there is one word which is coming from the very beginning is Ar-Rabb. Ar-Rabb has to do with a tarbiyah. He's the main educator. Educator means what? You have to educate yourself to be close to God. You have to go through a process which is do and transform yourself to be better. It's an ongoing perception of yourself, is that there is no humanity, no dignified human being if there is no education, tarbiyah, which is the way you transform yourself. But it's not only this, it's that with the self-transformation, you have to transform the world at the same time. So to make it a better place. So this is the way I understand al-Islah. Al-Muslihun are these people who are coming to reform the world for the better. They don't want it to be as it is. They want to change it for the better. So in fact, if you come with this understanding, anything in your life, from yourself, your heart, your knowledge, your mind, should be used to transform the world for the better. Our knowledge, scientific knowledge, is to transform the world for the better, to make it a better place for human beings, and for animals, and for species, and for nature. So this is an understanding. And I might have to deal with people who have another understanding. They say, some would put the emphasis on the fact, that's fine. I'm here to purify myself, but the world is going to be corrupt anyway. So I don't want to be involved. Some, but not all, in the Sufi tradition are like this, but not all. Be careful. And be careful also with this Sufi new look, which is a new way of talking about Islam, is everything is about spirituality and you don't have any rules. So I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about the serious tradition here. And some are saying, I'm not going to be corrupt by the world. I'm protecting myself and purifying myself, and this is what I have. I have to understand and accept that this is one understanding of Islam. I don't think that this is the complete one, but I accept that. And on this other side, so also be very careful with people willing to reform the world, but they don't talk about spirituality. So science without conscience is problematic, as Rabelais put it. So here, for me, it's this very understanding that there is a process of taghyir, changing. You have to change, and this change is exactly this. God is not going to change anything in you all if you're not going to change yourself. So the process is يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِكُمْ, that you have to change what is in yourself. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ. He's not going to do the job if you don't go to do the job. And what is this job? Taghyir. And taghyir means islah. And islah means for the better. This is what we have to do. So it's a process, it's a demanding process, but this is the very understanding of Islam. And this is why I think that today we need an applied ethics, because this is the way for us to make it a better place to live and to question the finalities, the ends, the goals of what we are doing. So, this is something which is important. And even all the words and all the Islamic terminology for me have to do with this. When, for example, we are talking about jihad, many people are talking about jihad. You know, it's an effort, it's to make an effort, that's all fine. But at the end of the day, if you come to the very essence of the word, is to resist what is bad in order to reform it towards what is better. I'm resisting myself in order to be better. So jihad is a two-way process, resistance and reform. But not only resistance, it has to do with reform. So it's exactly the same with the world. You are attacking me, I'm resisting. But the end for us to get peace is to reform the process of your attack in order to get that peace beyond you. So it's always a reform process. In fact, jihad is the way towards peace, never a way towards war. But to get peace, you have the two ways. Resistance and reform. And reforming yourself, and you're reforming even your enemies when they are attacking you in order to get something which is beyond that. So it's a very important commitment towards yourself and the world, and this is where I put Islamic ethics. So I don't want to come with Islamic applied ethics without getting this understanding of Islam, because we might disagree on that from the very beginning. Now, the second point here is, if I want to reform myself, there is something which is quite clear. Why, from the very beginning in the spiritual field, when the messenger, peace be upon him, was talking to people, he was adapting, for the same question, he was adapting his answers. Why? Because we have the same rules, but we are not the same people. You're not like me. Maybe one of the main challenge for you is to be generous. And maybe I'm coming from a family with generosity was everywhere. So my problem is not generosity. My problem could be bad temper. Every one of us has his own problems. And we need to know ourselves in order to reform. So the knowledge of the self is as important as the knowledge of the ahkam, the rules. I need to know the rules, but I need to know myself in order to use the rules to improve myself. It's exactly the same with the world. We need to know the rules, al-ahkam, but we need to know the knowledge of the science in order to be able to get a better understanding, to reform. If we don't do this, we are always going to catch up with the reality. And this is where I had a problem with many of the scholars who were teaching me, to whom I have a great deal of respect. Up to now, I think that they did and are doing a great job. But we were using the same concept, but not in the same way. They were using the concept of reform because the world is changing and we need to change the fiqh, we need to change the rules to catch up with the reality. But this is not to transform the world, this is to adapt yourself to the world. I don't think that I have to do this. I want to transform it for the better. So I need the knowledge of the world in order to transform, and this is what I'm saying in the book. There are two kinds of reforms, at least two generic definitions. The first is adaptational reform, and the second is transformational reform. When you want to change the world, you need the knowledge of the rules, the knowledge of the source, but also the knowledge of the context. Because when you master the context, you have a vision for the future. If not, you are just trying to adapt yourself. And to adapt yourself is, for example, a group of scholars, fuqaha, highest level, no discussion about the credential they have with the text. But they get a report on, I don't know, brain, heart, society, sociology, anything, economy. They take the report and they have to give a fatwa on that. The only fatwa that you will get from this is with the report is a protective fatwa. It's not a transformational fatwa. Because it's so complex that we are trying to avoid what is haram and to adapt ourselves to the situation. If you don't get a deep knowledge of the context, the fiqh is a protective fiqh, not a transformational fiqh. So the fiqh is important, but the nature of the fiqh is very necessary. It's that you have to question the nature of what you are trying to do. Are you going to a protective process or a transformational process? Which is, once again, something which is important. And having said this, this is where the scholars in the beginning, 8th, 9th, 10th century, the Middle Ages, many of them, they had the knowledge of the text and the knowledge of a specific context because it was easier to get this knowledge. So they were dealing between two knowledges. And one of the first who was very clear on this was Abu Hanifa when he was dealing with trades and money. He knew what he was talking about. This was his field. He was a rich person. So he was dealing with this, and he came with allowances, understanding, Dar al-Harb, how it works in non-Muslim majority countries, how it works between us. And he came with very courageous, at that time, very courageous fatwa. Very courageous fatwa. But it came from where? His knowledge of the context, his knowledge of the field. He knew what he was talking about. And if you talk about maslaha, it's a public interest. You need to know what we are talking about. To make it easy for the people, if you don't know what they are facing as traders, for example, what are you going to talk about? It was possible for one person to know this. Today, the universe of sciences is too complex for one to get all this. To get all this, it's not possible. We need people working together. But having said this, you understand, you don't talk about fatwa, you don't talk about fiqh, you don't talk about the sources, you don't talk about the objectives, you don't talk about ethics if you don't talk about authority. Who has the authority to do that? That's the point. So I am advocating something which is a shift in the center of gravity of authority, not to say that the fuqaha have no authority, but to say that the scholars of the context who know what is happening in the medical sciences, biology, human sciences, they have an authority. They are ulama. إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء is not only the scholars of the text. The people who are God conscious or have this relationship with God are not only the people who know the text, are people who know the context. And we need them in our process. So this is where I think applied ethics is a shift here, saying we need them. We need them to be involved in the discussion, and this is where I think that I want to raise the last 2 points. We need them, and because we need to question the sources, and this is where in the book I'm just advocating the fact that not only we have as a source the scriptural sources, the Quran was Sunnah, where there is a consensus, and by the way, there is no consensus on consensus. No, there is no. That's not true. Anyone who's telling you al-ijma' wadah, it's not wadah. It's not clear. Who are the people who are putting within the ijma' and al-qiyas, which is analogy? Once again, it's problematic. It's al-ijtihad al-fardi, is someone trying to get analogy. And sometimes it's problematic because some scholars are stopping very quickly and others are going very far. For example, do you have a hukm or a fatwa and a legal opinion on smoking? The great majority of the scholars are saying it's not in the Quran. Smoking, the Quran is silent about smoking, so the only thing that we can say is makruh, is not good, to be avoided. But if you are serious about the whole thing, and you are coming from the field of medical sciences, I have no problem to say, having studied the whole thing, on many levels, economic dimension, first, health dimension, economic dimension, the whole understanding, that I would be very harsh on smoking. Very harsh. Very harsh. I don't think it's possible just to put money to buy something that is destroying your health and say, okay, there is. I don't think so. But the great majority of the scholars, makruh. So the point for me is really to, let's say, what is he saying? Yes, I'm following my time. In fact, I have 6. Ethics in time as well. So I think that this is where I think that we have to question our methodology. That what we have today is councils of fuqaha coming together and trying their best with the knowledge that they have to give us legal opinion. But if we can carry on like this, we are going to produce what we have already at the highest level that we have in the Fiqh Council in the United States of America or the European Council in Europe. For example, we are, facing, the challenges of industrialized society, sciences. We are dealing, for example, I was dealing with the European Commission on Ethics that I was there. It was quite clear that what we were producing is a fiqh of protection. No real contribution, a vision for the future. And sometimes we came with things that were interesting that others coming from the Christian tradition say, oh, we didn't know that you went so far in that field. And especially, this is what I'm saying in the book, in medical sciences. That this was produced not always with all the complexity. For example, organ donation, it's very good to have answers on the medical dimension. But now you can't come to the medical without having a sense of economy. If you say to someone you can sell your organ, which door are you opening on the economic field and the economic order? That you are telling the poor people that they can sell their organs just to face the poverty? We are not only dealing with medical sciences. Applied ethics in that field has to do with economy. So you need to get a sense of all the challenges. Any medical doctor who is working at the grassroots level understands some of these dimensions because he or she is facing economic pressure, economic questions, and all these dimensions that sometimes the scholars of the text cannot get. So we need now to reassess these platforms where the councils, where the fuqaha are coming together. And my sense and what I am proposing, and I was saying to Asim yesterday that I was very happy to now have an agreement in Qatar that for the next 10 years we'll have these workshops and councils where we will have scholars of the text and scholars of the context coming together on 7 fields. To come together and you have to discuss the issue. You have to listen to the people of the context telling you how complex is the issues in order for you to reassess not only a protective fatwa, which is possible as a first step, but a vision that is helping us to transform and to be transformative in that field. So the methodology is problematic, and we need to have this shift in the center of gravity. But it means that many people understood this, that I was criticizing the scholars. It's not at all criticizing the scholars. It's a call towards the community. It's much more asking the scholars, the medical doctors, the physicists, the physicians, and the biologists and the economists. You have your say on the whole process. This is your field. And by the way, even with non-Muslims, I think that the scholars of the text, of course, are going to be Muslims, and they have the upper hand on what the ethical ground is going to come. The final word on what is Islamic or not is coming from Muslim scholars, Muslims. But as to the knowledge of the complexity of the world, someone could come with no Islamic background, but an ethical concern, and it's coming to give something which is important. all what was said about the last economic crisis coming from people who are at the forefront of the economic understanding and knowledge, we can take from them. And then, with the scholars of the text, get something which is our way. So my final point here is the methodology should be reassessed. And the last point is also the objectives. And I am not the first one who said that. Many scholars were saying and reassessing. We had in the Islamic tradition of al-maqasid, the objective, 6 main objectives. You know them. It has been, I'm sure, repeated here. I don't want to go for this. But I think it's too wide, too broad to be effective. And the first who said this was not last century. It was in the 14th century, and quite paradoxically, because we don't have a good understanding and knowledge of Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah was one of the first saying there is something missing in the whole thing, is that the intimate objectives should be reassessed. That when you are a Muslim, you don't only deal with the outward reality, but you deal with an inward reality, and you need to have ethics for your heart. How are you going to get this well-being, this peaceful heart that you are talking about? It has to do with ethics as well. You have to question the objectives. I would say, and this is what I'm proposing in the book, that a new chart of the objectives should be done. But I'm proposing something as a starting point, but this is going to be done by the people who are working on the ground in the different fields. What is going to be the field when it comes to intimate life, to the individuals, to the societies, to the international communities? All these objectives should be reassessed, but we can't go with only 6 that are very nice, still right, but too broad to be effective in our discussion. Raisuni was talking about this, Kamali was talking about this before, even some of the scholars in the beginning of the 20th century, Rashid Rida talked about that as well. So you have many scholars who were talking about this. In the Hanafi tradition, you have scholars, and today you have Yusuf al-Qardawi was coming with this. Ibn Taymiyyah, Ben Bayya was also talking about this. And then what I was trying to do is just to come with something which is effective and not coming with the final word, because I don't have them. Many people are saying, oh, you should give us responses. No, the book is much more about questions than answers, because I'm exactly saying that I don't get the answers. If not, what is the point of saying it's very complex and to come with all the answers? I don't have all these answers, but I have some questions. So this is the way we have maybe to deal with the objectives. And this is why I think that for today, our understanding of Islam, our priorities, our objectives, and the way we deal with the context, and especially for us, I would say that these questions are crossing the board, as important in the Muslim majority countries than in the West. But it might be that in the West, we are equipped with this, arena where we can go for this discussion and we can propose something which is creative, effective, because we are at the forefront of some of the contemporary challenges. So it's a great responsibility for the Western Muslims to be involved in the process, not as minorities. I don't like it. I don't like this, all this business about minorities. I don't buy it. But as Muslims facing contemporary challenges and trying to get responses and to deal with all the people from also different traditions that are trying to use their principles, their ethics, respective ethics, in order to change the world for the better. This is where we can come together. And this is why I'm not using Islamic economy, Islamic medicine. I'm saying Islamic ethics in economy, Islamic ethics in medicine. And get it, it's very important. It's not the same to say that there is something which is called Islamic economy and something which is Islamic ethics in economy. There is a common ground here. It doesn't mean that we don't question the paradigm, but we are coming from somewhere to question the paradigm in a specific field. I would say that it's complex, it's difficult, but we can do it together. Thank you.